Let's get caught up to where we are in the story so far. After God created everything there is with a desire to do life with people, people turned their backs on God. Sin entered and shattered the relationship between God and humans. But God decided to restore that relationship by building a new nation, beginning with Abraham and Sarah. Generations go by, and through a course of events, they find themselves in Egypt. 70 people in Egypt, and life is flourishing. Fast forward another 430 years, and now they no longer are flourishing, nor are they only 70 people. 1 million to 3 million Hebrew people are in Egypt living as slaves. Last week in the story, we heard how God worked through Moses to lead the people out of Egypt, out of slavery, through the Red Sea to freedom. And today, in the story, as it continues to unfold, the people of Israel had been on the run for about 3 months, as we heard, and they get to the foot of a mountain. They're in the Sinai Peninsula. And God calls Moses up this mountain and gives Moses and gives the people through Moses these 10 commandments. And like the kids here, we might say, the 10 commandments, the big 10. But if all we're thinking about is these rules and do's and don'ts and shall nots, we're missing what's really going on here. We're missing a bigger picture. For in our readings and in this whole chapter 5 of the story, we come across a word several times, and that word is covenant. Covenant, an agreement, an arrangement, a promise, a treaty. This way of living that God invites people into. And that's what I want to think about today. Covenant. Now, in the ancient world, there were lots of different kinds of covenants. And one of them that has been found by scholars is a covenant between a big king and a little king. Big king looks at little king, and little king's land is usually occupied by the big king. And the big king says, I am Big King David, ruler of the land of Oz, or something like that. It's called a preamble, where the king, the big king, announces to the little king who the big king is. And there are 6 parts to this covenant that we're talking about now. Part 1, I am so and so. It's the preamble. Part 2 is the historical prologue. There is a reason I'm telling you all this, and it'll become apparent in a couple minutes. Historical prologue, and this is what I've done for you. This is what I, Big King, have done for you. I have fed you, I have protected you, I have built roads for you. And then we get to the third part. Therefore, this is how I want you to live. These are the regulations, the understandings. Then there are 3 other parts. Part 4 is the treaty is going to be read and stored and reread several times. Part 5 is that this treaty was made in the presence of the nation, the gods of the nation, plural, small g, with an S on the end. And then finally, if you follow these regulations, these stipulations, this is Big King talking now, then you will experience blessing. If you don't, you'll experience consequence of not following the stipulations. Now, in our Bible reading, we see the first 3 parts of this 6-part covenant. Our Bible reading from Exodus chapter 20, the prologue, the preamble rather. God says, I am the Lord your God. Part 2, the historical prologue. Who brought you out of the land, brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. That's what I've already done for you. And you've not done anything yet. You've not even been able to respond to the rules because I haven't given you the rules yet. I've done this out of love, complete love for you. Part 3, the stipulations. For us in this covenant that we're talking about, it's the commandments. This is how you are to live. This is what I'm inviting you into. And as I shared with the kids, it's not I'm inviting you into a better way. I am inviting you to live as my people, the better way. Of course, you might not choose that, and then there's consequences to not choosing the better way. It's living not as well. Now, what I want you to capture in that is the good news that the commandments were given in the context of a covenant, of a covenantal relationship. The commandments were given not to, but as part of, I love you unconditionally. I've chosen you unconditionally before you could even choose me. Before you could even turn to me, I've turned to you and said, I am the Lord your God. And by extension, that means you are my people. I embraced you just like that. And now I'm inviting you in to a better way. A way that is different than the normal way. You see, we are called to be different. We are called to be set apart. In our first Bible reading from the 19th chapter of Exodus, it says that we are to be for God a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And that word holy means set apart. It means different. It's what we're called to be. Pastor Craig Groeschel, he's pastor of, get this is a hip and trendy name, lifechurch.tv. That's the name of the church, lifechurch.tv. Craig Groeschel wrote a book called Weird. And the point of his book, it started out as a sermon series, but the point of that book is that as followers of Jesus, we are called to be different. Or we are called to be weird, at least in the eyes of the world. We're called to march to the beat of a different drummer. We're called to radical generosity, for example, which is way weird by the world's standards. We're called to pray for our enemies. Way weird from the world's standards. You know, when someone strikes us on one cheek, you know what Jesus said? Offer the other. Weird by the world's standards. We're called to focus not only on me, myself, and I, but we are called to focus on others. That too is weird by the world's standards. We are called to be weird, says Groeschel, because normal isn't working. Normal isn't working. Normal leaves us wanting. Normal leaves us empty. Normal leaves us like the children of Israel before Mount Sinai, wandering in a spiritual wilderness. So let me ask you, are you living in a weird way? Are you living that weird, that better way that God invites you into? That better way is for you. And it is for you today. But it is also for others through you. Others. Others. We are set apart, made holy, by God for the sake of the other. That's what that other part of the phrase means. We're not only set aside or made holy, we are also called to be a kingdom of priests. And a priest in this context, well, a priest handles sacred things, right? And then goes to God on behalf of others and goes to others on behalf of God. So what is this sacred thing that you and I are called to carry? God says the whole earth and everything in it is God's. That means that everything is sacred. And we are to handle all of it, the whole world and everything in it, including ourselves, our time, and our possessions, as though it were sacred, because it is. And we're to handle it all for the sake of the other. The others who need to see and experience God. Others whose lives are perhaps defined by being in a spiritual wilderness, but whom God is inviting also to this better way, this covenant way. Just as God intended to use the Hebrew children, God intends to use us, you, to invite others to this better way. And that's what it means to be the church. And quite frankly, that's what this Celebration Sunday is all about. And it continues beyond worship. You are all invited to stay for a brunch that has been prepared. I hope that you have smelled once again the cinnamon rolls baking. That is for you to enjoy as we celebrate being the people of God. So this Celebration Sunday is about celebrating what it means to be the church. As we respond, as I said already, joyfully and sacrificially and generously and cheerfully to the questions, two questions. One, what is God calling me to give to financially support the ministry of St. Andrew's in 2019? And two, what is God calling me above and beyond that to give, to pledge, to a 3-year capital appeal called For Such a Time as This? And why do we do that? So that others can see, so that others can experience the unconditional love of Jesus Christ, so that others can be invited into this better way that God intends for each and every one of us. You and I are here for such a time as this, to make life-changing ministry possible in and through this congregation for decades and for generations to come. And I simply want to say thank you. Thank you for one living this better way. Thank you for living in this covenant with God in such a way that others are invited into it as well. And yes, I know, painfully so, that often I need, and I'm guessing you need, to be reminded again and again to continue living in this relationship, to continue living in this better way that God intends for us, which is why we gather for worship like this, right? It's why we study the Word. It's why we get into that story. It's why we gather together with Christians for mutual care and support and love, to encourage one another along our journey so that we can live this better way. Yes, we do benefit. Believe me, I know this. We do benefit from being part of this family of faith. But we do not exist for ourselves. We always exist for the other. So thank you. Thank you for being a kingdom of priests and a holy, set apart, different, weird nation on behalf of others. My brothers and sisters, thank you for being the church.